Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star. And today we have, of course, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
It's always my pleasure. And I think Ivan Kucherenko will join us from Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan. Do you have a movie?
Thank you, Sasha. Yeah, we have a movie, a really tragic one, but I want to show it for you today. So let's start with it.
Yes, please.
I saw a guy cut in half lying near the exit from the barracks. He was screaming. I don't even know what to compare those screams with. It was agony.
This day marks 2 years since Russian forces committed one of their most heinous atrocities. The massacre at the Olenivka penal colony in the Donetsk region. More than 50 prisoners of war were killed, and at least 150 injured in the deadly explosion. The Russian authorities immediately accused Ukraine of carrying out the attack with HIMARS rockets, fabricating propaganda videos hours after the strike. Meanwhile, they have done every step to impede any efforts to investigate the explosion, blocked UN monitors' access, and haven't allowed any other independent expert analysis. Based on the testimony of some 50 witnesses and survivors, the assault was deliberate, both to cover up atrocities and to undermine Western arms supplies to Ukraine.
Horrifying screams were everywhere. The whole scene was just atrocious. I fell out of bed and was overwhelmed by some debris. My body started to burn, like really burning. I was badly injured, especially my eyes.
According to the UN Human Rights Office's internal analysis, the scale of the damage does not match the impact a HIMARS strike could have.
Even a single HIMARS rocket would likely have caused damage and destruction of the barracks and surrounding area of a significantly larger and more severe scale. In addition, witnesses described to OHCHR hearing multiple explosions. There were 2 explosions 1 second apart.
Prisoners of war are protected by international humanitarian law, the violation of which must have immediate consequences for the detaining power.
I can't see that type of movies. It's just so horrible. And I wish average people in the West would see this. Unfortunately, I don't think that they have access to see this type of movies. I wish there would be more of those. What do you think, Jonathan?
To me, it just defies comprehension. If Western audiences, particularly most American audiences, were to be subjected to this, it would have a significant impact. They would say, "I had no idea it was this bad." Americans, you have to remember that Americans did not have a really vivid, did not first start having vivid impressions of what war was really like until the Vietnam War, when CBS News and Walter Cronkite brought the Vietnam War right into American living rooms with scenes that shocked the average American. Americans used to have a very the American Home Front used to have a very idealized vision of what warfare was like. They tended to, in many respects, to romanticize it. Robert E. Lee was one of his famous sayings was, "It is well that war is so terrible. Otherwise, we should grow too fond of it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agree. Tell me, Ivan, how is the situation in Kiev? There are a lot of signals and polemics about the state of the war, the future of possible peace, and when and how is it going to peace be achieved. What the people are talking on the streets of city?
Actually, we had several sleepless nights here because Russia was launching Shahid drones on Kiev during several last nights, and this night it was a ballistic missile attack on Kiev. Luckily, those ballistic missiles. Rumors are that they were Korean, North Korean ones were successfully intercepted. But anyway, war is near, and I think that majority of people here in Ukraine understands that this from one side peaceful mostly peaceful life in Kiev can be interrupted in any moment, and at any moment Russian missile can destroy your apartment, destroy your car, kill yourself, or kill someone you know, or your friends or relatives. So it's hard to live with the understanding of this, but as for the end of this war and for possible peace agreements, no one knows the recipe actually of how to end this war. According to the latest social analytics, majority of Ukrainians are ready for peaceful negotiations with Russia. It's like more than 50% of Ukrainians are ready for peaceful negotiations with Russia. But from other point, the majority, it's like around 80% of Ukrainians are not ready to give up any Ukrainian territories and to stop our European and NATO integration because they understand that this is a future for Ukraine. And this is quite an opposite position for what Russia wants for, and for their point of view on possible negotiations. They say that, of course, they're ready for negotiations, but Ukraine should give up all the territories which Russia already occupied, and those they still haven't occupied. That Ukraine should stop the European and NATO integration. Ukraine should be demilitarized, which means that after this peaceful agreement, Russia will get a second opportunity to capture Ukraine with one major strike, and all that bullshit. And of course, we can't accept such conditions on peaceful negotiations, because we understand that these conditions will mean the end of independent Ukraine, the end for normal life of people living here, that the majority of Ukrainians who really like this country and who are nationalists, not nazists like Russian propaganda is claiming Ukrainians to be, but nationalists, because we like Ukrainian nation and we like our country and we want to live here and speak Ukrainian language, not Russian ones, and to watch Ukrainian movies, not Russian propagandistic movies. And we either don't want to be a part of Russian army, which will go further and will bring war to Europe, and don't want to assist Russian army in their invasion to Europe in future. But for Russia, it's also a clear understanding that they will not make a mistake they made during the Soviet Union times when Ukrainian Republic had a lot of possibilities actually to implement Ukrainian language, to implement Ukrainian culture within. They will not make such mistake, and as it's shown on the currently occupied territories of Russia, they're going to completely wipe out Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language, Ukrainian national identity, because in future it will make real possibility for Ukrainian uprising. So they will not make this big second mistake, and in case they will defeat Ukraine and conquer Ukraine, they will wipe out completely Ukrainian nationality, and Ukrainians probably will remain only in immigration, like Jews became immigrants after their country was actually captured and destroyed by Roman Empire.
Well, I agree, Ivan, with what you have said, and all of what you have said underscores the need for the Ukrainian military at a time and place of the Ukrainian leadership's choosing to achieve a decisive operational victory over the Russian forces by severing the control of Crimea from Russian reinforcement and supply. And if they can do this within the next several months in particular, which would be the most profitable window for Ukraine to do so preferably before the U.S. presidential election, but it doesn't have to be then. It can be really any time within the next 6 months, so that Russia will be presented with a fait accompli, a decisive operational defeat, which they cannot explain away. And so, which in any case, so what we do is, if they can achieve that, then Ukraine will have taken control of its own destiny, and will be able to enforce and be able to introduce their new reinforcements of Western weapons, and be able to launch a counteroffensive in the east, which will drive the Russians out of the remaining occupied territories of Ukraine. But first, they must sever and inflict a decisive operational defeat by retaking the Crimea.
Yes, I agree. Now, interesting is that, like in any business or life situations, everything comes from here, from your head. So let's see how evolved the Zelensky's approach to the war in the last several months, even in the last, I would say, year or so. So before, it was that Ukraine has to get to its borders of 1991, and that's the end result of the war, and anything less is not acceptable, and that's where we're going. And he had a point at the time, because if you look at the war itself, I think by the spring of 2023, Ukrainians won the war. At that time, spring of 2023. Now, Zelensky was at the time, prior to that also, he was visiting the European capitals and United States and so on, and his position was, or his belief, maybe a little bit naive belief, was that, okay, so all the West and Ukraine have a common enemy, and we have to act and work together to defeat that enemy. Ukraine is going to supply all the life force, and the West would supply the ammunition, weapons, financial help. And that was his position, and when there became at that time, slightly later, some doubts about the West resolve to fight that war together with Ukrainians, that it could be that the West may have slightly different goals in this war, or different ways to achieve those goals. Zelensky couldn't readjust his talk and his goals at the end of the war. That was followed by some problematic meetings, especially in the United States, between Zelensky and U.S. Leadership, and it almost collapsed with a 6 month no forthcoming help from the West, at least from the United States, I should say. And although situation started to change, but not significantly, unfortunately, because as in April, $61 billion were approved to help Ukraine. Only $1.2 billion were actually used for that purpose, and the end of fiscal year is September 30th. So that means that any way you look at it, the majority of the funds designated by Congress and both the Republicans and Democrats, that all will go in vain. And is if there is somebody who can be pinpoint on as why it's happening, it's definitely Joe Biden. And in my opinion, he was busy with debates with Trump, never mind that atrocious situation.
Well, that was a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a huge waste of time. But I don't think that that's very important. I think this is an exchange of prisoners between Russia, and that was very, very delicate situation, and that was, in my opinion, a very, very serious reason why Biden was basically sabotage the help to Ukraine. However, exchange is already done. Biden is no longer part of the election process. So maybe situation will change now, but the time left is not so much. It's all remains of August and September. So it's give or take my month and a half, a little bit more. Jonathan, what do you think about this situation?
Well, the current administration made its own calculation in arriving at what they thought was a good bargain in getting back American prisoners and who I'll call them hostages. It probably would be a good call, but overall, Russia perceives the current administration as being weak, and that is why they are not in any mood whatsoever to agree to peace other than peace that is totally on their terms and would amount in effect to an unconditional surrender, pretty much, by the Ukrainians. And so, Russia believes the Russian leadership believes they are in a strong position. They are continuing to brandish their nuclear arsenal. Now, remember that their word for deterrence is ustrashenia, intimidation, which quite literally describes how they intend to use those forces to intimidate their political and military adversaries into acceding to their wishes. And they're trying to use that for cover. And as I've stated several times previously on this program, the short-term solution to that is for the United States and its NATO allies to bolster, to the maximum extent possible, its ballistic missile defenses, and in the longer term, eventually to create what I call the worldwide strategic defense matrix, WISDOM, which would, using an upgraded Space Force, would effectively neutralize the nuclear arsenals of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And it would in effect be the perfect asymmetric response to our adversaries.
I was watching yesterday very interesting program. Ivan, maybe you're familiar with Igor Yakovenko. He's a very good commentator on Russian television programs and so on. Sometimes he's doing that in a funny way. But what interestingly is that he shows small excerpts from these programs. I was horrified what they're talking live on Russian television. For example, they almost call Putin, or if not him personally, but his leadership, as traitors, that they allow Ukrainians to put their Black Sea fleet in the harbors of Novorossiysk or somewhere else, and they allow Ukrainians get F-16s, and now their defense system will be so much stronger, and they also should get anytime a Patriots system, 6 or 7 Patriot systems or so on. And they are Solovyov and some other commentators. They're not commentators, sorry, they're propagandists. Propagandists. So they are screaming how Russia, which has a great nuclear weapons, how they bother, instead of taking Ukraine over and just destroy it in the next hour and a half, they are making some kind of image of a real war, a real fighting, and one side went up 100 meters ahead and the next 100 meters back. Why they are wasting their time instead of to finish this war in one day and the end of story? And they are talking about it on Russian public television. So you see that most of the Russians who don't understand much in
to them, it's abstract.
Huh?
To them, it is abstract. The use of nuclear
exactly.
To them, it's like nuclear weapons. To them, are like a magical power to destroy their enemies. They don't think about the possibility of either one, the enemy being able to block those nuclear missile strikes with an effective ballistic missile defense, in which case they look very embarrassed, or two, they don't think about the possibility of retaliation from, because if, for example, if the West and NATO alliance and in the West manage to deploy something resembling what I am talking about in the wisdom system, that if they were to attempt to launch a nuclear strike, a sophisticated ballistic missile defense introduces great uncertainty into the minds of a potential attacker. They do not know how many of their missiles would get through. They do not know which ones would get through. What they do know is that if their strike failed to destroy their opponents, they in turn would be subjected to a devastating nuclear counterstrike by the combined nuclear forces of the United States and NATO, which, by the way, does outnumber, just by a modest degree, but it still outnumbers the total Russian nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, exactly. That's the case. So, Ivan, tell me, if Ukrainians would be more sure about upcoming help from the West, especially from the United States, do you think they would still want 50% want to peace with Russia?
No, actually, those opinion is because of uncertainty in the future. We've seen how that delay from the West was from the United States particularly was postponed, and how it influenced the battlefield, and that Russia managed to capture more and more territories, and it was really hard for Ukrainian soldiers to defend our territory without those help. And but I just wanted to say that it's not about the help, but also about the allowance to use these Western weapons towards the Russian territory. Recently, I've heard, probably in the New York Times or Washington Post, there was an article that Ukraine was capable of destroying dozens of Russian airplanes on the airfield if United States allowed to strike those airfields with the ATACMS missiles. But unfortunately, Ukraine didn't receive such clearance, and we just missed this opportunity. So I don't know what the administration of President Biden is afraid of, or what upcoming consequences may be, but like a lot of speakers are saying, we are currently trying to swim with both our hands being tied on our back. It's like we have weapons, but we can't use these weapons to prevent future attacks on Ukraine. Of course, we were given a clearance to use those weapons in the border regions of Russia, but it doesn't cover the Russian airfields where majority of their aircrafts is stationed, and those 10 or 5 F-16s which we received is comparatively nothing to the number of Russian airplanes, because they have 100 of Su-35, more than 1,000 of Su-25 airplanes, and what those 5 or 10 F-16s can do with such a higher number of Russian airplanes. We need a mixed effect when we're being allowed to use, and actually, United States are prohibited to use F-16s to strike over the Russian territory. So we can't use F-16s to strike Russian aircrafts, military aircrafts on their airfields. We just can shoot them down in the air. Probably. And what's the reason of all that? Because what isn't clear is the reason. Maybe Jonathan actually can tell me what is in the head of President Biden's administration and his advisors. So they're prohibiting Ukraine to use those possibility and weapons to successfully attack Russia, defending this war.
Ivan, to be quite concise, their reasoning escapes me. I do not understand it. Go ahead. Sasha, what do you think?
Jonathan, I would like to, Ivan, mention that I've heard many commentators about exactly that question of using the Western weapons on Russian territory, and not Russian like Crimea or something, but Russian like Moscow, like Voronezh, like all the cities. When United Kingdom provided their Storm Shadow, there were no restrictions where they can be used. Mind you, at first, there were very few Storm Shadows, so the Ukrainians were very mindful of when and how they're going to use them. Then they ask UK, the top power, if they can indeed use this on Russian territory. You know what the answer was? Don't ask the question, do whatever you need to do. So Ukrainians, in my opinion, trying to provoke Western powers, especially in the United States, not only to send the top weapons like ATACMS, but also declare in open all over the world, yes, Ukrainians, get your ATACMS and go to bomb the Moscow and Petersburg and all other cities. I'm sorry, you're asking for too much. You got ATACMS, use them. Don't ask the question. Don't wait for declaration. Use them.
It is easier to beg. The saying is that it is easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission.
In Russian army, well, I was serving 50 years ago, of course, but there was a saying, first shoot, then ask the questions.
Ready, fire, aim.
Unfortunately, not in this case, and we're have to be always cautious while we can use these weapons and strike or not use, not strike, or if we will use and strike, then we will not have these weapons again, and the future shipments of the weapons will be delayed. And actually, United States have some power in actually ruling Ukraine how to keep this war, because I'm pretty sure that without those limitations, Ukrainian counter-offense could be more successful. Probably you've heard recently that Russian new defense minister called to Pentagon and asked them to stop Ukraine from launching operation during the day of the Russian naval fleet, when Putin and other prime rulers of Russia were present on that day, and Ukrainian intelligence forces were preparing a strike on the day in St. Petersburg, where those naval parade was carried out, and Russian defense minister asked Lloyd Austin to stop Ukraine from carrying out those strike in St. Petersburg. And,
well,
maybe Ukrainians had a real possibility to kill Putin that day, which looks fantastic. But anyway, we were limited to use this possibility by the United States.
It is possible, Ivan, that if the Ukrainian armed forces are able, without decisive permission, if they are still able to execute a decisive counteroffensive in the next 2 to 3 months, that is able to sever Crimea from Russian control and inflict that visible operational defeat on Russian forces, that may well change the thinking of the United States and its Western allies in giving Ukraine even greater permission to strike deeper inside Russia, because Russia will have suffered a defeat which it cannot explain away and it cannot disguise. So the key for the Ukrainian armed forces and for Ukraine itself is to inflict a visible operational defeat on Russian forces that is within their control and their means to do so. And with the arrival of more F-16s and other weapons, which they will be able to use in hopefully a much more innovative way, to be able to inflict that operational defeat and sever control of the Crimea. That is the key. That is the center of gravity that I believe will be decisive in attaining for Ukraine a just and lasting peace.
Jonathan, totally agree with you, and I would like to thank you and Ivan for today's program, and hopefully by Friday, same place, same time, we will have even better news. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Slava.
Bye-bye.